Thank you. Well, it's a huge pleasure to be here to share with you these thoughts about the new insights that we can gain about musculoskeletal disease using the unique UK Biobank resource. And I'd just like to start by echoing the thanks that others have given to the UK Biobank team, to everyone involved, and particularly to the participants, without whom this just would not be possible. So I thought what I would do is just very briefly set this in the context of the importance of musculoskeletal disease in terms of its burden on human health. And so through the Global Burden of Disease initiative to which we as an MRC unit have contributed, it's apparent that actually musculoskeletal disease, chronic non-communicable musculoskeletal disease, places a huge burden on human health globally. And that burden is increasing at a greater rate than the burden associated with many other chronic non-communicable conditions. And osteoarthritis, as you'll see here, and then osteoporosis through fragility fractures and other factors such as falls are large contributors to that impact. And just very briefly to say a word about osteoarthritis and osteoporosis, because those are the two conditions most closely linked to the DXA imaging. But of course, the resource has the wherewithal to answer questions about a whole range of other musculoskeletal conditions. Osteoarthritis is a condition that probably unfortunately many of you may be familiar with, but this globally it leads to around 17 million years lived with disability annually. Around 50% of over 65s will be affected by some sort of manifestation. And of course, the major outcome in cost terms is a joint replacement. And there's about 75,000 of these at the hip, a similar number at the knee annually in the UK, with rates projected to rise inexorably over coming decades. And the annual cost in the UK, which is similar to the annual cost of osteoporotic fracture, is about £4 billion. And fractures occurring because of low bone density, where there's low trauma, for example, you fall over a trip where you don't really think that you should have broken a bone, but you have done. Those fragility fractures will occur in 1 in 2 women above the age of 50 in their remaining lifetime, 1 in 5 men. And these fractures are associated with huge amounts of morbidity. And in later life, a fracture may be the event that precipitates the necessity for institutional care or other support from an otherwise independent life. And there's a decrement in relative survival. So these are conditions which have a huge impact at the level of the individual, of healthcare systems and societies. And for example, across Europe, fractures cost around 39 billion euros. And the UK Biobank resource is a fantastic platform on which we can investigate these outcomes. And I think the unique opportunity we have here, as has been alluded to in previous presentations, is the ability to examine the predictors of these diseases and the correlates in the context of other organ systems and other illnesses. And so from our work and from others, many other groups, it's apparent, for example, our work in CPRD, looking at the incidence of fracture, that there are factors relating to geography, to ethnicity, to sociodemographics that influence the incidence of fracture rate. And there's increasing evidence that there's an interaction between bone and joint disease and other organ systems and illnesses. So, for example, fat, muscle, chronic inflammation that would be associated with many conditions such as obesity, but diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis and bowel disease. Comorbidities which may predispose to fractures, but may also lead to a decrement in bone density. And there's increasing evidence that neurological conditions, cardiovascular illnesses are important here. We've heard about some of the environmental exposures which influence health, and those are captured in various ways in UK Biobank. And of course, information on ethnicity and mechanistic factors through the widespread genotyping and the comprehensive blood panel that takes in biochemical and various other immunological and other markers. And so we have a fantastic opportunity here to bring this all together. And I'll come back to how that might fit together towards the end, but I thought I should say something about the technology that we're employing here. It's all very well for me to wax lyrical about the opportunities, but it's important to know what we're dealing with in terms of the data. And you may be less familiar with the concept of DXA scanning than with, say, MRI or some of the other measures. And so DXA, shown here, otherwise maybe termed DEXA, dual energy X-ray absorptiometry, which is an X-ray based technique that uses X-rays of two different energies to compute the amount of bone in a particular region of interest. And at the clinical level, and some of you may have had these scans, bone density is measured at the hip and lumbar spine. For research scans, we can gain more data from whole body scans and the lateral spine image. And just to very briefly say what we collect in UK Biobank, we have a whole body scan, and this, I guess, is comparable, it gives us comparable information in some ways to the MR scan, but there are some important differences. Importantly, this takes in the whole body, but of course it is a two-dimensional projection and a rather more generalized measure of fat. So we can get fat, we can get measures of fat, of lean tissue, of bone across the whole body, and these are complementary to the MR measures, which give that, as you've heard, the volumetric and the much more specific measures within the body. But the important thing about the DXA measures is you get a numerical value out immediately, and those data are there in the showcase ready to be used. We can measure bone at the hips, and importantly we get a DICOM image, and I'll show some examples of those. Images of the knees, bone measured at the lumbar spine, and then importantly effectively a lateral radiograph of the spine. And you can see these rather lovely radiographic images that the DXA scan permits us to get. And this is all at very low radiation, so the sorts of radiation exposure you get from a DXA scan is equivalent to a few days background radiation from being outdoors, so much lower than conventional radiographs. And so in terms of the output, we've got numerical data in terms of bone mass, lean and fat mass, and various regional measures. And those data are there, they've been QC'd, we have an ongoing quality assurance program. But we also produce these DICOM images that can be used for novel post-processing techniques to derive new image-derived phenotypes, maybe relating to the shape of joints, characterizing vertebral fractures, or grading for osteoarthritis. And so putting that together, what we have is a landscape where at baseline we have a comprehensive deep phenotyping of individuals, 500,000 individuals, including the genetics and the mechanistic factors. And then we have, several years later, a repeat of the baseline data, but also these novel imaging measures in what will be 100,000 individuals. And then these are then linked, as you've heard, to incident outcomes. And I've shown a selection of incident outcomes there, but of course there will be many, many more that can be examined. And what this allows us is to view the imaging variables as outcomes in their own right, and of course the genetic determinants of those imaging phenotypes is really a hot area of research. But we can also use these as exposures to look at how these exquisitely detailed assessments of health and disease might predict incident outcomes. And we can also use this together as a whole to look at how the baseline data relate to the imaging measures and then to the outcomes. And importantly, given the unique breadth and depth of UK Biobank linked to its huge numbers, it means that we can look at the interplay between the various organ systems, between the various illnesses, to get a really comprehensive understanding of human health and disease in this unique cohort. And of course, as the population ages and as multimorbidity and frailty become ever more prevalent, there's a clear need for this sort of work going forward to make the full use of this unique opportunity. So with that, I will finish and thank again all those involved, and thank you for your attention.